Welcome to the Handyman System Podcast, your ultimate guide to building and running a successful handyman business. If you are an aspiring or working handyman or contractor and you're looking to learn business pricing, marketing, or automation strategies, you have come to the right place. So join us as we dive into the actual tips and proven strategies to help you nail down your business goals and renovate your path to success. Your hosts are myself, Becca, Ellison. I am the CEO of the Handyman System, a marketing agency that helps handyman businesses thrive, and I am often joined by Caleb Ingraham, the CEO of North Seattle Handyman. Let's get started. In today's episode, we are going to be chatting with Caleb from North Seattle Handyman. The video on Upflip from November 2021 was the catalyst for the Handyman System. It's kind of what started this entire thing. And at the time of this recording, it's now January 2025. It's just a little bit over 3 years since that YouTube video went live. And a lot of growth has happened to North Seattle Handyman in these past 3 years. We thought it would be fun as the first episode where we're bringing Caleb into the podcast to have a Where Are You Now Q&A session. Since many people, like 1.8 million at the time of this recording, have watched the YouTube video on Upflip, many know the story, but for those that haven't heard of North Seattle Handyman, you're completely new, you don't know anything about our story, I'm going to do a really quick recap before we bring Caleb in on the Q&A. If you want to see the entire YouTube video, thehandymansystem.com/about, we have it linked there. And the long and short of the Upflip video was that North Seattle Handyman was featured talking about how he built his business and how he stands out as the option to choose for homeowners needing home repairs in the greater Seattle area. We go more in depth about the video and how it spawned the Handyman System in episode 2 of our podcast. So you can check that out if you'd like as well. The important part here to know is that at the time, November 2021, Caleb was running his business as a solopreneur. He was wearing all the hats, right? He was charging $100 an hour for handyman services in the greater Seattle area. We, meaning Becca and Caleb, had built out his brand online and created some basic systems to allow him to create a really good client experience. And the business was doing really well. He was booked out 6 weeks. His top line revenue was around $300,000 a year, and he was very successful as a solopreneur. Now that we have the context where the business was, we can jump into the Q&A with Caleb about where the business is today and really what the last 3 years have looked like. So, Caleb, I'm so excited to have you here for the first of what's going to be a consistent appearance here with us on the Handyman System podcast. In this Upflip video, you talked about where you wanted the business to go in the next 5 years. And I believe it was 5 million in 5 years. So we're 3 years in. Give us an update about where your business is today.
Yeah, so we are at 1.4 million in revenue in just under 3 years. We've gone through quite a few different cycles of growth and then plateau and then growth and then plateau. We've hit a bunch of barriers and had to problem solve and overcome them. And I'm actually right now, after 3 years, finally in a position where I feel like I'm not just vaguely going in a direction. I feel like I have a much clearer path. And it took a few mistakes here and there, and we did a lot of things really well, and we did some things not as well. But all things being said, we still have 2 years to hit the goal. And a 5-year goal is usually just that. It's a goal. Like ultimately what I want for my company is to be wherever we're at, but profitable.
And you've been profitable each of the years, right?
Yes.
When the video went live, you were a solopreneur. And obviously you're not doing 1.4 million a year as a solopreneur anymore, right? I know you brought in a business partner. Why don't you talk about where you were right around the same time that video went live? So what brought you to bringing a business partner in?
Primarily it was that I didn't feel like I had the time that was needed to, I was so stuck on working in the business. I had no real time to work on the business. And so the impetus of having a business partner was a little bit of a share the load kind of thing. I also didn't have anyone to talk to. Like I could talk to you on occasion. You had your own job and your own stuff. And we would, of course, chit chat about it. But sometimes sharing in a struggle is easier than shouldering it all by yourself. From my perspective, like I wanted to collaborate with someone who cared as much as I cared about the business.
A employee is just never going to quite, because they're always going to be taking a directive. Mindset. Yeah. So you brought on Pete, who he wasn't a carpenter at all, right? He had a background in very mechanical things. He was at Boeing as a airplane mechanic, and he had been a car mechanic for years. Like he was very mechanical, but let's talk a little bit about what that was like in that growth of helping him get to a level where he was solid as well.
I think it took about a year. I think he would agree with that. He might say it took me, he's still getting there. Anybody who starts a new business has certain ideas that they think how the business should be or how the business should run. And to some extent, you have to allow those ideas to hit reality and then to have people get feedback. When we started, I was very intentional about saying, I want this to be a true collaboration. I don't want to just shoot down your ideas, because there was a little bit of me saying, okay, I don't necessarily think it is going to work, but I'm willing to run an experiment with you. And then you can get a little bit of feedback on your own. So like a good example of that would be, he wanted us to be hyper responsive to our customers, like same day response. Right. And so I said, okay, here's your workload. See if you can do it. And, a month later, he was like, this is too much. And I said, yeah, I know. But, there was some of that. It's really interesting what happens with these kinds of things, because there were a lot of ideas that he's had in the beginning that maybe we just weren't really ready, right? Because it was just us two. And in order to accomplish his ideals, we needed a larger team.
Yeah.
Right? So a lot of the things that he stated that he wanted, we are getting closer to be able to actually meet those standards. For instance, we don't set the standard that you have to respond the same day. That still is too much for us. Eventually, if we can build our team and use AI and different tools, we might be able to accomplish that. We run an automation that says, this is who we are. This is how we do business. This is it. The timeline in which you can expect to hear from us, etc. It's not like they're in radio silence, but for us to actually review their email, review their work request, and then get back to them, it's somewhere between 24 and 36 hours is the standard we set, right?
Yeah. It's so interesting in the handyman side of things, because that's different than even other home service businesses in regards to, like, they always say like speed to lead, they say, answering the phone is so critical to be able to answer right away, to be able to get the lead. But the handyman world is just a little bit different, because say somebody calls for an HVAC service or a maintenance, it's the same very simple thing to get that booking on the calendar.
Yeah.
When people inquire with you, it could be something as simple as, hey, my railing's a little bit wobbly, to here is literally a list of 16 different things that I want to know exactly how much it's going to cost. And also, most handyman businesses don't respond at all. So like the bar is pretty low. And the fact that we have set up those expectations of, hey, it's going to take us a couple days, but we're going to give you a thorough response when we can. The clients feel very communicated to, because that expectation has been set.
We get regular feedback that we're very responsive. There's always going to be people who would prefer you to respond sooner.
Instantly.
Like you're always going to, like, there's no world where zero complaints happen.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That world doesn't exist. But we get enough feedback that suggests that we're doing a good job there. So, he had a couple of other ideas as well that we're starting to employ, like, for instance, training.
Yeah.
I had to come to a few realizations as well. It just took me a while to get there.
Well, it's interesting because each year the business has gone through a set of growth. Like
Yeah.
we talk about how from when you were just solo to when Pete bought into the business and you added an additional employee in that first 18 months, so year and a half, the business went from 300,000 to 1.1 million. Like it was a humongous growth. So let's go kind of year by year to say like, what was the growth? What was the thing that you guys were focusing on each time and kind of what that revenue looked like from each of the year timeframes. So like the video went live on Upflip, very end of 2021. What did 2022?
Brought Pete on, and then I don't remember the exact timing of it, but we brought in a subcontractor who is a Ukrainian guy that we worked with his brother, and we basically kept them busy full time, 40 hours a week.
They found you guys as well because of the Upflip video.
And then we hired on one of our guys that we had been working with part-time on a full-time basis. And that was also like, we also added an admin. And we worked with you like one day a week. Right? And then on top of that, we added, I think, our plumber and electrician, and our tile guy came in next year. So we experimented with doing our own tile. So, but we grew from kind of just me to not necessarily 40 hours in electrician and plumber, but keeping, that many people busy 40 hours a week. And
the electrician, the plumber, and the tile guy are all subcontractors as well. You solidified a priority relationship when your clients needed, right? Because North Seattle Handyman, one of the things that we'll talk about in a later video is that you guys show up and market and promote yourself as a handyman business, but on the backside, you guys have a full general contractor's license so that you are not limited to the smaller jobs. Because the interesting thing about handyman stuff is that it varies wildly what a handyman can do from state to state. So I just want to have that clarification. You guys lead with handyman, but do all the way up to small and medium remodels.
We have a general contractor's license, so we're allowed to, in the state of Seattle, take on just about any work if we so chose to do.
State of Washington.
Yeah. So that first year we were, Pete and I were focusing on handyman, but in order to keep everybody busy, when you grow that much, you're always sort of on edge of, do I have enough work to keep these people busy? I have a background in kitchen and bath remodel. So it was when people started to ask, can we do X, Y, and Z? The answer was yes, because I knew I had to keep this many people busy. And when you're in a growth period, like, you want to sort of you don't want to be overly busy as a handyman. You don't want to be 4 months out as a handyman. You want to be 2 weeks out as a handyman. It's more appropriate to be 4 months out as a remodel. It aligns with people's expectations, generally speaking.
A broken disposal, they might be down to wait 2 weeks if they trust that you're the right person for it, but they're not going to wait 2 months.
That's right. And so we very quickly realized that that this blade was double-edged. Okay, it does allow us to make sure people are busy, but we've now kind of split this company in two different ways. So we had Pete kind of take on the handyman role, and I took on the remodel role. To give a little bit of background on Pete, it was a natural fit for him because he didn't have experience in any remodel. So doing small jobs, he had a comfort level with that, right? And we would, and those things, a couple of interesting points was I started to give him like bigger projects, and then I would leave him alone, and he'd say, I need way more help on this. And then I said, yeah, but I'm trying to get this other work, and I'm trying to manage these other people. And so we, like, over the course of, probably 3 to 6 months, audited what makes sense here, right? And what made a lot of sense was for him to take on the 2 hour, 4 hour, 8 hour jobs. And then I would handle the bigger stuff. So it was a very natural split because of our skill sets, basically. And, and he started to estimate for them. And to his credit, Pete was like, was just very dogged in his pursuit of competency. And this, he worked really, really hard to educate himself through YouTube, educate himself as much as he could on his off time so that he could perform at the level he wanted to perform, because he is a bit of a perfectionist. And so, I don't want to get too in the weeds about that, but I thought it was relevant that like that also happened in that year. So then that year and a half, a lot, we grew a lot, and there was a lot of like, moving quickly and breaking things.
I would love to add a little to that. I sit with you guys once a week, right? You guys contract with me to still continue helping you with your marketing, your systems once a week. So in these weekly meetings I would hear all about the different things that were going on and in his growth, but all the business growth. But like you guys went from, one person, 300,000, 6 weeks out to 1.1 million in a very short period of time. But that brought like, okay, now you have the people that can do that. And now you have to figure out where they are best suited to be. And you brought on an admin to make it so that you didn't have to be in the weeds of the invoicing and kind of moving things on the schedule. But it also meant that there was a massive amount of growth, but it changed how your everyday looked in the business. And I know at that point, both you and Pete were still like 30 plus hours with a hammer in hand as well. And that's shifted over time to, as you guys have continued to grow, which we'll talk about a little bit here in a second. So like,
I would say the pendulum swings back and forth. There are times where we're like, okay, I think we're ready. And then someone quits or gets let go, and then we're back in the field. It's very much not a straight line. When there's opportunities to work on the business, we take them. Yeah. And then when the job forces us to be in the field, we go back in and do the best we can to get the business to a point where we can work on the business again.
Yeah. It is, I think a pendulum swing is a good way to explain that. Okay. So that got you guys through 2022. Now, there's an admin helping with the computer side of things a little bit more. Not any of the estimating. The admin was just there to like manage the inquiries, respond to the clients when there was anything like, oh, I can't do Monday, can we do this other day instead, type of a thing. You guys are still full on in the responding to estimates because every inquiry is so uniquely different. Now, the two of you are in the field a lot. You have a full-time person, employee doing the handyman stuff, and then you have a variety of contractors as needed depending on what the jobs were. So that's kind of, you finish out that first year. Year two, what was your focus and your growth when it came to that second year? And I just want to clarify for everybody listening that we're talking in relationship to when that YouTube video went live. Caleb's business started in the middle or end of 2017, I believe.
It might have been 2016 or 2017.
Somewhere in there. So like he had been running as a solo guy for 5 years or so at this point in time, at the time of the video. And now from 5 years is these couple of years of growth since that video. Okay. So year two, what did that look like?
So a big portion of year two was dealing with sort of the fallout of fast growth. So, our two subcontractors, our two Ukrainian subcontractors, we were keeping busy. We ended up separate parting ways. We picked up another employee, Levi, who was
a real employee this time.
Real employee, yeah. And we trained him on doing drywall repair and different things. We had a bunch of turnover with our admin. Right. We would train an admin, our first one, and then she would get an opportunity to go to school at a special school. All the work that we put into that, fell back on us. And then we would be like, okay, let's figure out how to do this, until we find another person. There began, once again, another pendulum of of hiring and firing and hiring and firing. And that's kind of what took up the next year or so. We brought on 2 additional guys, and they were not perfect and not really ideal, but they were people, right? And through that process of like hiring those people and then eventually having to let them go because they weren't right for the job, there was a ton of growth in learning about how to hire people, how to manage people. So by the end of December of that year, both of our guys that we had hired who had claimed to be, like journeyman carpenters, handymen, and had basically had done enough works that had to get warranty that we eventually, one of them was particularly bad in warranty and the other one would regularly be late or not show up to work.
It's interesting in the realization as well, and these are conversations that are happening a lot today in the meetings between you, me, and Pete, is the conversation of hiring. Hiring it's not an easy solution. The 2 different bucket of options that you have is hire someone young and inexperienced and take time to train them and teach them to your business way of doing it, knowing that at the beginning they're pretty green and they're going to need a lot more time for training, or bring somebody in who's been in the industry for 20, 30, whatever, 40 years that are older. They can be assigned to a job and that they have the capabilities of doing it. But the downfall that you guys learned was that now they have their own way of doing things and they might be less willing to work within the needs of the business. They kind of are like, it's my way or the highway. And then you had to decide, like, do we want the younger people that we have to train and take the time and energy to do that? Or do we want the older, more experienced people that we have to maybe have to deal with headaches in a different way? And I think that year was that big, like, oh, there's a decision to be made here.
I think that the realization we came to was that whether they were young and inexperienced or older and experienced, both of those versions struggled to do things the way we wanted them. So the realization over time is that even if you hire somebody for $45 an hour, you're going to have to spend 3 months holding their hands and training them. And for me, that was a very difficult realization to come to. That had something to do with the fact that of how I was trained, which was I wasn't trained. I was thrown into the fire and then, or thrown into the ocean and asked to swim. Right? But I also had people that were at a higher level than me watching me. Right. Like, so.
And that's where this business is unique. There is a lot of solo time that you're not just going to a site where,
you're going to be for 6 months.
You're going to be for 6 months and there's a super there and there's other people there. And now you're going to a location that is a active home. People live there. You have to talk to the customers. You have to be respectful of their home and also get the job done and do it well enough that it's not, oh, somebody will fix the rest of it later. Like, it needs to be buttoned up at the end. And that takes a specific type of person.
Yeah. And I had a mindset of saying, I'm paying this person really well. They should be able to
just
manage themselves. And it took me some time to understand that that isn't ever going to work. and I need to get on board with processes and training. And it's funny because my original Upflip video was about systems and and efficiency, but it still took me a year and a half to 2 years to understand that that there are a different set of systems and trainings for your employees, right? Like once you do that, like, there's a whole set of things that are going to be asked of you as the owner of a company that you're going to have to get used to and embrace. And if you don't, then you're going to be in a state of constant sort of, I'm putting out fires. So,
Is-
by the end of that year, we had let these other two guys go. And then we said, okay, we need to work on our SOPs.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have standard operating procedures because if we want consistency, if we want guys to do it the North Seattle Handyman way, then those have to be written down and filed and hammered home. Right. So that part of it was about a year-long process.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I talk, obviously I've got a lot of handyman clients. And one of the things that I ask people at the beginning of our working, either I'm coaching them or we're setting up their online presence and we're figuring out sometimes they're brand new in the business. We have a conversation of okay, where do you want to take this business? Some guys are like, I just want a business that keeps me busy. They might want an admin, but they want to do the job. And they want it's something that they're more or less going to say a solopreneur forever, which is absolutely fine. It's a direction for them to go. Or they're like, hey, I want it to be really big. I don't always want to be swinging the hammer. I'm getting a little older and I would rather build something with employees and kind of something a little bit larger that has a legacy. And both options are great. And it's important to know which one you want to go to because there's different skill sets and learning that you have to do and mindset and growth that you have to sit there and go, what worked for you at North Seattle Handyman as a solopreneur that got you really busy, but also working to the max is different. Your issues and your problems are different now than they were then because of the growth and the direction that you chose to go to, right?
I think that if I were to simplify and say it in a simple way, is that you go from a state of handling problems that you have direct control over to handling a bunch of problems that you have indirect control. So I can't directly control someone that is 10 miles away in a different location. I have indirect control. I can give them rules and scopes, but ultimately I cannot directly supervise that person. Right. There are a series of problems that flower from that. And that transition from being in direct control to indirect control is definitely a shift in mindset. And then there are a bunch of things you have to learn on a leadership scale in order to do that effectively. So you can say whatever you want to, but if nobody's listening, doesn't matter. Right. So there's an element of inspiration. There's an element of, my problem is more that I'm a little bit, I'm not anti-confrontational, but I'm optimistic. I'm very optimistic about what people are capable of. So, and I would give them
benefit of the doubt,
plenty of rope.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, because I was overly optimistic about them and I was not as okay, I need to, even though this person I'm paying a lot of money to, I also still have to train them in the North Seattle Handyman way. They would do things that were not done in the North Seattle Handyman way. And then the customer would get upset because I had set certain expectations with them that my employees didn't meet. Right. So going through that process and then going and fixing. Both Pete and I went through certain stages where we were doing a ton of warranty work because the guys in the field were doing 95% done stuff. They weren't finishing a whole series of different things that
they weren't showing up on time. They weren't communicating. I remember that August. So this was August of 2023 when you had you had 3 good employees that are out in the field. And then you had these other 2 that you guys had brought on that you no longer kept, but so you had 5 people in the field plus potentially you and Pete. And you had that August, it was you guys had 186 inquiries, right? So things were chaos, like in some ways a really great way, and in some ways not. You guys were super duper booked out. You guys were working crazy hours. And then one of the guys, you guys had to get let go. And then the other guy just like stopped showing up or something. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember that August being like this realm of, it was like that tipping point, I think, of you guys realizing, okay, we really need to figure out our employee side of processes so that this chaos doesn't happen again, right? So let's talk a little bit again about year 3. So this is the year that we just finished. So this was 2024. What did 2024 look like? You had gone from 300,000 just yourself, and then you had, business partner and additional employees, and you guys hit 1.1 million. The next year, you guys hit, I think it was like 1.3 million. So you guys still had a bit of growth between those 2 years. And then year 3, what you guys just finished up doing, what was the focus and the game plan of 2024?
So the focus was to make the same amount of money approximately, but make more profit. You can have a $10 million company that doesn't make any money. You can have a $20 million company that doesn't make any money. If you're going to do this, you have to make a certain level of profit. So our focus was like, we know the guys that we have are good guys. We're not necessarily opposed to growth, but it's going to be like,
it's not the main focus.
It's not the main focus. Our focus is on standard operating procedures, tracking specific metrics. And then what ended up happening is we did really well up until about October. And then we had 2 guys that got hurt and had to go through to L&I, one of which was just like a cut in his finger, and he was back in a week. And then the other guy is still out because he tore his meniscus, and we don't know when he's coming back. When he's going to come back. In addition to that, we actually did hire another guy who was, once again, I wanted to hire someone a little bit older with a little more experience, and he came on and ultimately didn't work out and quit after 2 weeks. Now, in that 2 weeks, I had sold like a
ton of work,
$100,000 of work to make sure that he would stay busy for the next 4 months. So at that point, all my plans were based off of having me, Pete, and 4 techs, and now it was me, Pete, and 2 techs. So we had to, work our tails off to make sure we could still accomplish everything. We brought in some temp labor. In Seattle, there's a service called Madden Industrial, and it's sort of like a temp labor service. They do skilled labor. The part that saved our butts is we've been so disciplined about making sure that we've made good profit. And even through this stretch, our labor costs went down because we had, 2 guys left, and then Pete and I put on our tool bags and got to work, and we still made our profit numbers. Up until December. December is one of those months, especially if you're going to let people off for a week, and you're probably not going to have a very good month, except for that fact.
The interesting thing, I think, to point out also in this year of 2024 was that the growth that you guys had and the focusing on the business, you had the team in place for most of the year for your handyman guys and your remodel guy, that you and Pete you guys were spending 16 to 20 hours in the field versus all of the time in the field, right? You guys were managing and business building more so than actually there in the field until the guys all left, and then it was a shift.
One of the things we were able to do would be Pete's really good, relatively boring work of writing standard operating procedures.
And also, we didn't talk too much about the relationship between you and Pete, in that you are very much more of the visionary, the where are we going, kind of what's going to happen. Pete is very much okay, to make that, this is what we have to do to execute, which is what all really good businesses that are going to scale really need. Is if you're going to have 2 owners, you don't want them to be the same person, right? You need them to have different skill set and different mindsets.
What we were able to do is I would be in the field making sure the guys what they need, and then Pete would be able to take a little bit of time. We would be able to say, okay, Pete, take a week and just work on estimates, right? And maybe you have to do a little bit of estimation here, but you can just be in the office, try to get as much of that stuff done. And then there'd be things that maybe I was better suited to. And then Pete would be in the field. We'd be like, let's plan a week where I can not have to be so in the weeds and I can attack things according to my skill set. But then our labor pool got cut in half and we had to go back in the field. And we're just now getting back out of that, especially because, that year end is always like, there was a self-imposed pressure to make sure things were done at a certain time.
What's the game plan now then? If you're looking, do you still think that the 5 years to 5 million is realistic? Is that still the game plan? And what is the focus of this upcoming year?
I would say that our focus for this upcoming year is training. We went through a painstaking process of how are we going to post for jobs? How are we going to interview for jobs? How are we going to bring the guys in, giving them extra training period, etc. So we went through the process, you, me, and Pete went through the process of going over and trying to really get every single detail that we could think of into a document that we could follow. This year's goals are to hire 1 to 2 handymen. And because we know that we have to train anyways, we're going to shoot for a little bit younger, preferably like someone who is maybe just starting a family and is a little bit more open to doing the things the way that we want them to do. Not necessarily somebody that doesn't have any construction experience, but someone who is right in the middle, maybe a high-end apprentice, a newly minted journeyman, but just someone who's open to doing things our way. The final thing that we struggled with was we use a lot of technology in the field. And frankly, the guys that were just not using it, it was difficult to get them to put in comments. It was difficult to do a bunch of different things. Our hope is that if we train those guys, they'll be a little bit more capable on the tech front.
And to be clear, the age is less important as the mindset and the ability and willingness to be like, yes, we understand we use a lot of technology and we've created a whole application process that is a skills form to see where they say they're confident and competent and where they say they have nothing. And part of that is, okay, are you capable and competent of using the phone? Because you are solo. We use a field service app that we need you to put the information into, because if you don't, we don't know what's going on, right? So the year that's coming up, you guys are going to continue moving forward training. We've been developing an entire hiring process that is very technology forward to make things easier for you. That process is bringing the form, and there's an automated process of correspondence that makes it so that it's a less of a lift for you guys who are already very busy elsewhere to be able to add in that hiring portion, which is exciting. And I'm excited to kind of get down to that. But to wrap this podcast up for today, there's just a couple of final questions that I think is really important because of how much growth you've had in the last 3 years. Are you the same person today as you were 3 years ago?
Yeah, not by a long shot. There's been a ton of self-work I've had to do to understand how I was limiting us, how, the things that had gotten me to where I was during that video maybe were limiting me from taking the next step, right? And identifying what those things were and then changing my behavior sets to help a team operate better, right? So once again, indirect control more so than direct control. That's one thing that I've had to do a lot of personal growth on, accepting myself as a leader of men and accepting that I had earned it.
Yeah.
Right? So like, instead of, just faking it until I made it. Yeah. But at a certain point, like in order for me to truly lead men, I needed to accept that I was competent and confident enough to do so. So that was another part of that process.
It's interesting because if we gave the Caleb of 2021 the business that you have today, if we just plucked him out of that timeline and put him here, he would have no idea how to make sure this business continues to succeed. That's because of the just amount of work that you have done, that not only in learning how to have a bigger, more complex business, but also the self-awareness and self-allowance of the capabilities and changes that need to be able to do what you need to do to get the business to where you want it to be.
I think that when you're successful, it comes with a certain degree of ego. That ego is positive in a lot of ways, because in order for me to believe that I'm capable of leading men, I need to believe I'm capable of leading men. That requires a bit of ego that I should be listened to. The negative side of it is that you might start to believe your farts don't smell. Right? In my experience, people, when you're signing their paychecks, are going to put you on a pedestal. It's your job to take a step off of it and say, no. I am just as human as you guys. And I'm and there are a ton of mistakes I could make. So taking a step off that pedestal and owning your failures and being willing to fail and then get back up and move forward. I think that's actually more powerful than acting like you never fail.
I would agree.
That's the big thing. I tell my guys all the time, I'm pushing myself to failure, right? I'm going to fail. I'm just going to dust myself off and get back up and try again.
The interesting thing, the way that I move through life, is that in my mind, those are not failures. They become a failure when I didn't get back up to try again. They were just I learned what didn't work, and then get up and recognize, because really you never fail at something unless you stop trying, right?
Yes. The mindset shift there for me is when you have a certain amount of success and you start signing people's paychecks, everyone is going to look at you and puff you up like you can't fail. It's tempting to believe that, right? So I call them failures in order to make sure that my ego does not get too blown up. So the other side of that coin might be what you're talking about. But if you have a big enough team that starts looking at it in a certain way, it's easy to start to believe that that
your farts don't stink.
Your farts don't stink. Trust me.
They stink.
They stink. So
that Upflip video, as we wrap this up, I just have one final question. What do you think that Upflip video had as an effect on North Seattle Handyman? We know that the Handyman system came out of the demand that came from that video, but for North Seattle Handyman as a business, has there been any downside to it? Has there been any upside? Kind of, how do you think it affected North Seattle Handyman?
I think that it improved our SEO, obviously, but it also just I will be walking around Home Depot and people will be like, "Hey, I've seen you." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's right. Yeah." But so there's a certain visibility that I think it really helped us with, not just online, but also, in the real world. That was a very positive part of it. From my perspective, there weren't that many negatives because it also was a vehicle where people would approach us and say, "Hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. I'd like to work for you." That was another area where we were able to bring in people who might be a good fit for us and try them out. And when you're hiring people and training people and managing people is very difficult, especially if you started a solopreneurship, that is essentially, in my position right now, that's the thing that I need to focus my attention on is that. And doing that right is going to be the difference between us growing and being successful versus growing and constantly failing.
Yeah.
So I'm very focused on 1% growth. I want to get a little bit better I'm very focused on saying, we're not going to hire somebody until we have a rock solid document. Oftentimes I am the guy that says, when it's 80% done, let's do it. In this case, I am not. In this case, let's get that document complete, and so that there's not all this room for negotiation. And then I'm going to be a lot more strict about who I hire and that hiring process, because to me, that's what will eventually take us to the next stage of growth, is a valid hiring and training process.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we are wrapping up with this particular episode. I think this was really great to hear, like the growth, the context. It gives people an idea of kind of where things have gone. And the cool thing about North Seattle Handyman and the Handyman System, and the fact that we are integrated so deeply together, right, is that I've helped you since the very, very beginning. Even at the very beginning, it was more like when you had an issue, you came to me and we figured out how to fix it. And now it's a lot more integrated, but I've been there to help you guys in the systems and processes and continued brand growth at a much deeper level since that video, which brings us to what is this that we're doing with the Handyman System podcast. The goal here is to help give the information to help handyman businesses, remodel businesses, really all the home service businesses, the information to know how to grow and thrive in your business. The great thing, so you're going to be on the podcast quite a bit. So our thoughts here is that we're going to be creating a podcast every week. Caleb is going to be a regular contributor here on the podcast. And the dynamic is that, you know, me, Becca, I have the marketing, the online presence, the systems, knowledge, and expertise to help give you those tactics. And Caleb has the everyday realities of how that implements into a business, from the size of being a one-guy solopreneur all the way up to a business that will grow to $5 million in 5 years of that video, right? So, Caleb, what is it that you want to bring to the podcast? What is your goal and intention if you're going to be so generously providing your time to give this information as often as you can?
So my goal is to talk as much as I can about the inner battle, entrepreneurial perspective, your emotional state, the conversations you're having with yourself all the time. We might, when we're doing our podcast with us two, it'll be much more of a back and forth. But one of the things that I want to try to contribute will be more like solo monologue type things about things that I'm going through that I feel like might be relevant to other service entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And so I would expect those to be maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah. I'm excited to have them as bonus episodes in addition to our planned weekly episode drop, where it's the thoughts of where he's at or the things that he's working through in his business or his mindset that might be helpful for you, our listeners. So we're going to wrap this up today. And just like Caleb was saying, like, we will be paying attention to the engagement, and if we are getting the feedback from you, the handyman, the remodeler, the handy ladies, like the people that are listening to our podcast, the feedback that we're paying attention to is, are you subscribing? Are you leaving reviews? Are you sharing this information with other people that you think would find benefit just like you did? So if you could go ahead and share on whatever you listen to podcasts on, share your feedback with us. We are open and here to listen to it. And we want to be here helping you as long as it's beneficial to you. And the best way we know if it's beneficial is that feedback. So download, subscribe, and please leave a review. And until then, we will be back next week with another episode. But Caleb, this was super fun. You know, we're going to do a lot of this. And I just love BSing with you. So I'm excited to get going.
Me too. It should be fun.
So that wraps up another episode of the Handyman System Podcast. I hope you found today's insights valuable. Remember, success isn't just about knowing the right tools. It's about taking action and building your business every single day. If you've enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with anyone you think might find it valuable. Until next time, keep building and keep improving.